Well, last week we spent some quality time with Mary, and we heard Mary's yes to God. A yes that she spoke aloud, that she offered to God in the midst of her fear and uncertainty and no small amount of risk. And we asked what it means for us to say yes when we are afraid. We asked how fear might shape the limits of our faithfulness. And so this week we turn to Joseph. And what is striking about Joseph is not what he says, because he actually says nothing. There are no recorded words of Joseph in the Gospels. But it's what he chooses to do. What kind of love takes shape through his decisions? You see, Joseph lives in a world where conformity is a survival strategy. At this point in history in Judea, it is under Roman occupation, and violence is never far from the surface. Joseph's life is consumed with economic vulnerability, political control, and the constant pressure to stay in line. In Joseph's community, honor and shame are not private feelings that you feel, but public currency that determines whether you belong or whether you're pushed to the side. And Joseph is a working man. He's a carpenter, dependent on his community to help to sustain him, to sustain his ability to earn a living, to remain a part of the community, to be seen as righteous and reliable. And in that tightly ordered world, something happens. The one whom Joseph loves is pregnant. Matthew tells us that Joseph is righteous and faithful, and he isn't willing to expose Mary to disgrace. And I think that is important. It says something about Joseph. But on the other hand, it reminds us that Joseph is not indifferent to the law, nor is he dismissive of the norms that shape his world. But Joseph's righteousness does not express itself through punishment or publicly shaming Mary. Instead, he looks for a way forward that limits harm. His initial plan to divorce Mary quietly isn't about being cowardly. It's an attempt to protect her within a system that gives Joseph all of the power over her future. Before Joseph understands what God is doing, before an angel appears, before there is clarity or reassurance, compassion is already shaping Joseph's response. He chooses the least damaging option available to him. He uses his social and legal authority not to shame Mary, but to shield her from harm. And this is what protective love looks like, and this is what I want to talk about today. Protective love does not begin with certainty. It begins with attentiveness, with paying attention. It notices who is vulnerable in the world, and it asks what harm we might be able to prevent. Fear asks how we might preserve our standing, how we might avoid risk, how we might come out of a situation unscathed. Protective love asks different questions. It asks who will bear the cost if nothing is done, and whether that cost must fall where it so often does, on those with the least amount of power. Joseph's world expects him to be a man, to exert control, to defend honor, to restore order through decisive action. And instead, Joseph practices restraint. He chooses mercy in a system designed to punish Mary. And this decision places him a bit at odds with his own culture. And then the dream comes. The angel speaks not to erase Joseph's fear, but to redirect it. Do not be afraid, the angel says, not because there's nothing to fear, but because fear does not get to determine what faithfulness looks like. Joseph is invited to trust that God is at work in a way that will not protect his reputation or solve every question, won't make his life easier, but God is at work nevertheless. When Joseph wakes, he responds without words. He takes Mary into his home. He claims her publicly, and he names the child Jesus. Now, this is a world where lineage and legitimacy and honor determine one's place. And so the fact that Joseph names his son Jesus is an act of solidarity and responsibility with what is happening, with what God has planned to happen in this world. And Joseph binds himself permanently to this story, accepting the misunderstandings that will come and the whispered judgments that will come. This is Joseph's yes. Joseph teaches us that faith is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes faithfulness looks like staying when it would be easier to step away, like standing between someone and the forces that would harm them, like absorbing risk rather than passing it along. This is an embodied love. It takes shape in concrete choices that protect others' lives. And this kind of protective love does not belong only to the past or only to the private parts of family life. Joseph's story presses into us, asking how protective love might take shape in our own time, in a world still governed by fear, still structured by systems that reward punishment, still quick to turn difference into threat. You see, we live in a moment when fear is being deliberately cultivated. Fear of one another, fear of scarcity, fear of losing status or control. We see how easily fear is weaponized to justify harm, particularly toward those whose bodies, identities, or lives do not fit neatly into our ideas of normal. Protective love today may require us, like Joseph, to use whatever power or voice we have to stand between vulnerable people and the systems that would diminish them. For some of us, that protective love will mean standing with trans people whose lives are treated as political abstractions rather than human reality, whose safety and dignity are debated rather than safeguarded. It will mean refusing silence when laws and policies increase harm, and choosing instead the difficult work of advocacy and care. It will mean standing up when immigration and customs enforcement comes for our neighbors. Protective love does not ask whether standing up will be costly. It assumes that it will be. And it chooses to do what is right anyway. Joseph reminds us that righteousness is not about defending purity or preserving our own sense of moral correctness, political correctness. It's about protecting people. It's about refusing to let fear dictate who deserves safety, dignity, and belonging. Now, Matthew tells us that all of this unfolds so that a name might be fulfilled. Emmanuel, God with us. Not God above us, not God distant from us, God with us, entering vulnerability, choosing presence over power, standing close to those most at risk. Joseph becomes invited into this new way of living, and we are invited too. Joseph's yes was quiet, but it was courageous. It didn't announce itself, but it changes everything. And it leaves us with a question that lingers beyond this story and into our own lives. when fear is real and the costs are high, what kind of love will we choose to practice? Protective love does not eliminate fear. We will still be afraid. But protective love moves through it. It shows up. It stands firm. And it insists again and again that no one should face harm alone. As we move into the final days of Advent, we ask ourselves, who among us is carrying something sacred and heavy, but who might be doing so quietly? What fear might we be called to move through, not for our sake, but for the sake of others? How might our love, fragile and imperfect as it is, but a real love, become the ground where God's promise takes root? This week, we're not asked to fix the world. We're asked to take each other's hands and walk forward into the world together.